Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly pumped to have you here today. If you're the kind of focused learner who loves tearing apart fascinating stories and digging into how they're actually made, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're literally unlocking the doors to a super atmospheric Indonesian horror film called Motel Melati. We're going to take a deep dive into the absolute nightmare fuel that is the fictional lore of this cursed estate, but also we'll look at the really unique real-world filmmaking magic that brought the whole thing to life. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and trust me, the details are absolutely captivating. All right, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Welcome to Motel Melati. 2. The Curse's Dark Origins. 3. Fates of the Motel Guests. 4. Behind the Screams. And finally, 5. Reception and Streaming. Starting off with Section 1, Welcome to Motel Melati. Okay, to really get this story, we've got to set the stage. Imagine it's 1997. It's a pre-internet, pre-smartphone world. If you're traveling, you can't just pull out your phone and check Yelp reviews or Reddit threads to see if your hotel is, completely cursed. You're just totally isolated. To kind of give you a mental image of the vibe here, ask yourself this. What if a murderous Morticia Adams ran Hotel Transylvania? Because that is the foundational hook of the whole film. It takes those really dark, gothic stylizations we know from Western media and mashes them up beautifully with deep, atmospheric Asian horror lore. It's an incredibly ambitious aesthetic that just completely sets the tone for everything inside that motel. Now, before we go any further, we should probably define what kind of place this actually is. So, in Indonesian, a losmen is basically a lodge or an inn. But Losmen Melati? Yeah, it's definitely not your standard roadside stop. It's this highly secluded, supernatural den run by the mysterious and honestly very frail-looking Madame Melati, along with her accomplice, Goluk. People check in, but they absolutely never check out. Melati basically uses the motel as bait. She lures these unsuspecting visitors inside and forces them to confront their absolute worst fears. Why? So the damn spirits living there can literally devour their souls. Yikes, right? Moving right along to Section 2, The Curse's Dark Origins. Let's rewind a bit and see how this whole curse actually started. Chronologically, we're going way back to the late 19th century. Melati was born to this impoverished, outcast woman. Out of sheer desperation and financial ruin, her mom makes a classic twisted monkey's paw style deal with a witch doctor. Obviously, the wish is granted, but it curses both her and her stillborn daughter, Melati. Like, moments later, a mob of villagers catches them and hangs them. Someone actually saves Melati at the last second, but her mother dies. Then a few days pass, and this outcast physician named Dr. Kuzno gets his hands on the mother's corpse. He does this horribly unholy operation on her and boom, unleashes a primordial evil that curses Melati with eternal life. Jump forward 100 years to 1997, which is where our film kicks off. A police inspector finds a rotting corpse in the motel and Melati just brutally hacks him to death, plunging us right into the present-day nightmare. So I want to pause for a second and talk about Dr. Cousteau because his role here is absolutely vital. Cousteau was this doctor completely shunned by society because he did these morbid, twisted experiments on cadavers. The guy was so deranged that he literally kept his own deceased wife's corpse inside his family villa. And actually, fun fact, that villa is the exact building that eventually becomes Motel Melati. Anyway, people begged him to leave Melati's deceased mother alone, but he ignored them, operated anyway, and that unholy transgression is what officially triggered the curse. He woke up spirits he had wronged, which led to his own super gruesome, painful death. He basically engineered his own doom and trapped Melati right in it with him. All right, Section 3, Fates of the Motel Guests. Now that we know the rules of this terrifying place, let's look at the folks unlucky enough to actually book a room. What's really interesting about this is how personalized the horror is. The motel doesn't just kill you, it tailor-makes your death based on your deepest fears and your own past mistakes. For instance, we've got a grieving family coming back from a funeral. They get stalked and killed by the vengeful spirit of their own grandmother who blames them for her death because they were negligent. Then Melati and Goluk just casually toss their bodies in the furnace. Next, you have this amorous couple spending their first night together. They get this cruel, literal version of a lifelong commitment. They rapidly age into these frail, elderly bodies and suffer a terrible death. And finally, a couple of miscreants who try to rob the joint, they don't even get the supernatural illusions. They just get brutally attacked with an axe. So the horror spans everything from psychological mind games to raw, physical violence. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 4, Behind the Screams. Stepping away from the fictional gore for a minute, making a movie like this is a massive logistical puzzle. And it was a huge milestone, too. This was Catchplay's very first original Indonesian production. The vision really came from co-director and writer Mike Walloon. I love his perspective on why he chose the horror genre. He pointed out that, comedy is super culture specific. A joke that kills in one country might get zero laughs somewhere else. But horror is universal. Like he said, something that scares someone would inevitably scare the other 10 guys. The raw instinct of fear just completely crosses borders, which makes a haunted house story incredibly relatable for a global audience, no matter where you live. And the production team's creative problem-solving was just brilliant. Instead of driving around trying to find some random dilapidated lodge and struggling to make it look scary on camera, they just built their own. Right on the backlot of Infinite Framework Studios in Bataan, they constructed this custom, perfectly lopsided exterior set. Because they built it from scratch, they could force this eerie, unnatural perspective. Wildy Wan himself described the design as Tim Burton-esque. It just gives the motel this creeping, deeply unsettling vibe the literal second you look at it. Okay, but this next part is hands down my favorite detail from the entire production. It's about the weather. If you've ever been to Southeast Asia during the rainy season, you know it can completely destroy a filming schedule, especially for outdoor horror scenes. So how did they fix it? They hired a pawang hujan, a traditional Indonesian rain shaman, to literally hold back the rain. And here is the craziest part. According to the director, these shamans had an 80 to 90% success rate, keeping the sets totally dry on shoot days. 80 to 90%. It is just this incredible, fascinating intersection of modern filmmaking logistics and traditional cultural practices. Finally, Section 5, Reception and Streaming. So, how did the critics and the fans actually respond to this crazy mix of Gothic aesthetics, deep folklore, and rain shaman-protected production sets? Well, it's kind of a mixed bag, sitting at about a 5.1 out of 10 on IMDb right now. Reviewers definitely noticed a sharp contrast in how the movie was executed. On the plus side, people totally praised the ambitious Gothic visuals, the practical sets, and that really deep historical lore. It absolutely nails that thick, creepy atmosphere. But on the flip side, critics pointed out that the storyline gets pretty obscure and genuinely hard to follow as it goes on. Plus, some felt the acting from the secondary characters was a bit forgettable, and that the sheer scare factor sometimes missed that visceral punch. So it's a film that definitely crushes it when it comes to mood and world building, even if the narrative coherence wobbles a bit for some viewers. Now, if this explainer has piqued your curiosity and you want to analyze the aesthetics and the lore for yourself, Motel Melati is currently streaming on Lionsgate Play. You can catch Alexandra Gottardo bringing a seriously chilling presence as Madame Melati, along with Kiki Narendra playing the totally deranged Dr. Kusno and Adinda Burchan as the young Melati. It was co-directed by Mike Walloon and Billy Christian and produced by Infinite Studios and Catchplay. Which brings us to the ultimate question. We've mapped out that tragic 19th century curse. We've broken down the psychological torture waiting in those guest rooms. And we've marveled at the set design that framed the whole nightmare. You now have the complete blueprint of this cursed lodgeman. So, knowing all the supernatural horrors and the dark history waiting inside those lopsided Tim Burton-esque walls, do you dare to check in? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I will see you in the next one.